Yes, anyone, any more questions, guys? Anyone, any questions still that I can take? All right, so let's come back and let's look at our infrastructure today. Let's go into and dig into the portal side of things. So I have all these components that was deployed using a release pipeline in Azure DevOps. And in this release pipeline of Azure DevOps, I am going ahead and I also have, let's say, a couple of things like, let's say, the environment, let's say the password. And yesterday, I also went ahead and used an Azure DevOps Key Vault task, but right now I deleted the Azure Key Vault. So I've just disabled this task and I've placed the password directly out here. And since I'm developing it out, I've run this particular pipeline and I have the infrastructure which is ready with me. So if I click on this one and go to the browse section, this is going to, let's say, go ahead and give me this particular, let's say, telling the list of courses and all that stuff. Now on an end to end, let's see how it really works out. Okay, let's go to the pipeline. Sorry, let's go to our let's say DevOps project. Let's go to our file system. This is our file system. I also have the build pipelines ready. So what I'll do is I'll just go here into my build, say edit, and I'll just go ahead and put a continuous integration trigger. So this is already there. Let me look at my release, and if I'm not wrong, there should be a continuous deployment trigger that is also enabled out here. Let me cancel this. There should also be a continuous deployment trigger. So let's do this. Now I am a developer. I'm coming here. Let's say that I want to edit my, let's say, file, or I want to, let's say, go ahead, do some changes in my code. So I'll come here, select a new branch. I'll say feature, Kiran. I'll say test changes, and I'll link a work item to it. And once this is done, let's say I into the SQL file, into the SQL commands, I go ahead and do a small edit here. I probably want to add one more line. I would say this is AZ400. This is Azure DevOps Engineer. And let's change this value to 4 and done. I just added one more line and I'll say commit. I'll say this is added a line on the SQL file, and I'll say commit this out, create a pull request, and into the developer branch, I would say create. And now a member of the PR approval group should approve this out. They approved it. Also, I did not add the sonar, but you will have a sonar basically that will get triggered as and when you, let's say, go ahead and create a pull request. And once this is complete, I'll delete my branch. I'll do a squash commit. I don't have the merge fast forwarding, etc. It's forbidden by the policy. I'll say complete this out, and now it's going to go ahead and, let's say, queue, or it's going to go ahead and, let's say, merge my, let's say, changes into the develop branch. And as and when that happens, it automatically triggers off a build pipeline, which is now going to go ahead and, let's say, kick off. So I have the repository. These are being, let's say, made into the repository on the developer branch of this repository using a pull request. As and when that happens, I have a continuous integration pipeline that's getting triggered in Azure DevOps. And this continuous integration pipeline is giving me something called as the artifact. And the artifacts are just not, let's say, your code artifacts. You also have the infrastructure artifacts out here. And as and when I have a new artifact, in my case, let's say this will take about a minute or so to restore, build, and everything. So as and when I have a new artifact, this is going to kick off one more pipeline called as a release pipeline in Azure DevOps that we have configured, because release in Azure DevOps has a continuous deployment trigger, and this release is configured to go ahead and deploy it in the form of stages. So very firstly, we have a development, then we have a QA, then we have stage, then finally we have a production. So as and when this release pipeline kicks off, it goes into development, and once it goes into development, right? So this is done. So if you look at this, this is done. Let's go into the release. It would have now triggered a new release out here, release 8, that just got triggered at around 7:11:43 seconds. And if you look at the release, right, this is triggered by a continuous deployment. So it's telling continuous deployment for so on and so forth. It's telling it is waiting for approval on the development stage. So now I am a development lead. I'll say approve, and in the comments I'll say taking the latest changes or deploying the latest changes, and say approve this out. So now as and when I do that, this is now going to trigger off the release pipeline. And in the release pipeline, as we were looking at yesterday, it has multiple steps. Like, it'll start it first, try to, let's say, go ahead, pull it from the key vault. But in my case, I just disable this out because I don't have the key vault. But with the first step, goes ahead, pulls from the key vault, gets your secrets. Once that's done, it'll go ahead and try to do, or try to create the infrastructure. In my case, the infrastructure is already there. So it'll just tell you that, okay, fine, the infrastructure is there. So I'll just do an incremental approach. So it's going to download the artifacts, then creating the infrastructure, deploying the code out here once again, and then going ahead and changing your SQL file out here. So it's going to do the end-to-end procedure. And once all of this is done, then you can come back, do a browse, and you should see the fourth line that is added out here. Everything is going in a secure way. Everything is being built firstly in a very, let's say, the same thing that I'm building in a development environment, the same thing I'm taking to a QA environment, same thing I'm taking to the staging, same thing I'm taking to the production. I'm maintaining the configuration of the code. A. B is that I'm making sure that everything is secure and everything is collaborated very well. Meaning once this is done, I can simply ask my developers to, I can simply add a functional test case in here, which I'll get in, let's say, at a later point in time. You can put a functional test case in here to see whether, let's say, the data is getting reflected. And once the functional test case is done, then you can go to the other environments like QA and staging and production and so on and so forth. So now I'm taking everything in a sequential order, deploying. I know what I'm deploying, and I know what is the timeline that I'm deploying in. So this is what DevOps really enables me to do, and this is the end-to-end process on what you are following right now. So we have a branch policy, we have securities on the branch, we also made sure that we have a continuous process for continuous integration, continuous process for deployment, and then going into development, QA, staging, and production out here as such. Yes, any questions still here? Any questions still in this particular end-to-end flow that I can take? Anyone? Any questions that I can take till here? All right, so let's come back into, let's say, this particular application. So this is now going to take, this is just going ahead. And if you look at this one, the resource group and all the resources are already created. And this is the second deployment that I'm doing on this. It's just going ahead, verifying everything and saying, okay, fine, everything is good. And then it's going ahead and deploying the latest code on my application, which will take around 1 minute or less than a minute. And once that's done, so it took around 14 seconds because the code is already there. And then the command got changed, or the SQL file got changed. So it's going ahead injecting the data into the SQL database. It's saying invoke SQL command and all that stuff. It's going ahead and doing that particular SQL command on DemoDB, using the test user, using the password that you have given. And then finally, it's going ahead and saying, okay, fine, I have added a new line. So if you go here, it's telling added a new line out here. And what the developers or what the development team will now start doing is that they will now go to the let's say Azure portal, and they would have access to, let's say, or a contributor access to, or let's say a limited access to, let's say, this particular resource group. And they're going to go in and say browse and start their test cases on the UI. So they do a lot of UI testing, and if you see this fourth row has been now added. This now start They would now start, let's say, doing performing UI test cases and etc. Once they feel that the application is good, I can come here, say approve, and the development lead would say testing stands done, changes looks good or something like this, and give an approval here. Once this is approved, this will now go into the second stage, which is the QA. Here it will again wait for the pre-deployment approvals of the QA environment owner or the QA, let's say, environment lead. Usually the QA leads and etc. They would now go ahead and give an approval out here. This is how the code will now flow from one stage to the other and finally reach to your production, where your client is going to come here and give an approval and say, okay, fine, the code is live. This is all testing right now. This is all, let's say, testing and, let's say, stabilization phases right now. Finally, when it reaches the production, your code gets deployed into that particular environment, and the client would be able to see all those changes out there at his end. Yes, any questions that I can take till here? Second time infra deployment is overriding the existing infrastructure or deleting. You have to tell me that. It's an ARM template, so you'll have to tell me what it actually does. So that's up to, that's again question back to you, or question back to the class. Second time infra deployment is overriding or updating the existing infrastructure or deleting and recreating the new infrastructure. You will have to tell me what do you mean by an ARM template and what do you mean by an incremental mode of an ARM template. If you are able to answer that question, you have the answer yourself. So I have an ARM template. I am deploying the ARM template in an incremental mode. Just tell me what really does when you redeploy the infrastructure out here, and let me know by the end of the session. You have to tell me that whether it's updating or whether it's what it's doing and etc.
Not updating.
It's not updating. Then what is it doing exactly?
Actually, this didn't touch the existing data
Exactly. It didn't touch the existing
in
data. It just
incremental mode.
incremental mode. Exactly. It'll just check whether the data is there. If it's already there and the template is matching, it won't even touch it. It just goes ahead and checks this out, says okay, fine, all the data is there, and moves forward. So that's the reason it just took a minute to check whether all the, let's say, settings are in place or whether everything is in place and etc. And then it went forward out there as such. So yes, it's an incremental approach. That's right. That's correct. Right. And now, if you see, this is queued up because your last deployment would have, let's say, been stuck somewhere. So if you see this out, the last deployment kind of got stuck here. So let me just cancel this out. If you cancel now, when you have a deployment from an earlier release got stuck at a pre-deployment or a post-deployment approval, the other deployments will just get stuck. They won't move forward. So you will have to cancel. You'll have to see what is all waiting in your queue, cancel the existing pre-deployment and the post-deployment approvals, and then move forward. So that's what I did right now. So I just canceled the earlier release, and then we are moving forward out here as such. Yes, any questions before I move forward? So I have all these things on the Azure portal. If I come down to the Azure portal, let's see, I have a couple of things out here. I have a resource group, or I may not put the resource group. I have the app service, and I have an app service plan that got created from my ARM. I have a SQL server, and I have a SQL database. And whenever I click on this link called Azure Websites.net, the very first thing that your app service is going to do is that it's going to hit the SQL server, and in the SQL server it's going to, let's say, use something called as a connection strings out here. So let me grab this. So in the SQL, it's going to use something known as a connection string, and we are constructing, or we are creating the entire connection string within our ARM template. So I have the connection strings with me, and your web app is going to, let's say, use this connection string to interact with this particular SQL, run some queries on this particular SQL database, get the data, and display it to you as a user. So you are using your local laptop. So using your laptop, you are able to hit this, and the data is being displayed out here. This is the end-to-end procedure. What really is happening as such out there. Now, in case something were to break, again, I'm coming down to the session what we missed on application insights. So I would like to cover that one before we move forward with, let's say, the Azure DevOps part of the syllabus. So in case you missed something out here, let's say because of some reason you in your pipeline probably you did not give a particular value, you did not give a proper value out here. A lot of people are facing this issue that, you know what, I'm trying to connect to it, but there's some test user or something which is getting failed. So on your pipeline, when you're declaring a variable called password, you give an incorrect password and everything is now failing. Meaning, if I go into this particular web app and if I just go ahead to change the password out here, let me go into the configuration and let me go ahead edit the configuration out here. So this is the connection string. And in case, let's say you do not give a Microsoft -001, let's say that you have given some wrong password out here. Somehow the password got changed, or somehow the code deployment kind of changed the password. And I'll put a Microsoft 002. Okay, I'll save this out. So what I'm doing is I'm now giving an incorrect value to my web application. So if I give an incorrect value to my web application right now and go to, let's say, web app, and let's say refresh this out and try to browse it. Now it's trying to hit the SQL server with, let's say, an incorrect password. And as in when you have, or as in when you're presenting an incorrect password out here, see, your entire connection is wrong. Your entire connection becomes wrong. And the web application will never be able to talk to this particular SQL server. It will never be able to understand what the SQL server is really telling and all that stuff. And it will simply throw an error telling that, you know, it currently is unable to handle this request and everything. A very bare basic error. Again, if you want to further understand this error, one of the tools that you can have with your, one of the tools that you can use out here would be something called as a developer console. So here, this is my browser. You can go ahead, click on the three dots of my browser, and there's say more tools. There's something called developer tools. This will present you an entire, let's say, portal for the development console, which will just tell you that how the code is done and all that stuff. Just go to the network tab and refresh this page out. And as soon as I refresh it, right, it's now going to go ahead and give you some error logs out here. Let's expand this, and this is what it's telling. It's telling that, okay, fine, I have requested, let's say, or you have requested to go ahead and talk to a website called web app xyz SQL USE2, and you're trying to do, sorry, and you're trying to do a get method, meaning the method here that is used. When I say method, the code has a method out here that is built inside it, wherein it's trying to get something from the SQL database. So it's trying to do a get method and getting a 500 internal server error, and it's telling, okay, fine, it's giving you a lot of, let's say, details and etc. Again, this is going to give you a very bare basic understanding, a very high level understanding of what kind of an error that you are facing, a very high level understanding. telling it, okay, fine, 500 error or something like that. But in reality, you cannot really use this until and unless you know what are all the components that are involved, how is it, let's say, connected and all that stuff. Because of which, we need an intelligent system to help us out here. And that's where we will need to introduce something like an application insights into our architecture. An application insights instance or an AI. So short form, let's call it as an AI, application insights. Insights becomes, or application insights is a monitoring tool. When I say monitoring, it's going to understand what your web app is telling and also who your web app is actually calling. What are all the components the web app is actually connected to, like a SQL server or a storage account or something else. And it will also track the health of this particular, let's say, services, like the SQL server, understand what is failing, how is it failing, and etc. So let's do that. There are two sides to it. If you want to start with an application insights, two sides to it. The very first thing is this: you will have to create an application insights instance or an AI instance out here. What do I mean by AI instance is that you need to have an infrastructure in place to have the application insight. So what I'll do is I'll go back into my resource group, and in this particular RG, I'll go to say create, and here I'll search for application insights. I have something called application insights. I'll say create the application insight. And again, it can be in any resource group, not a problem at all. But for my convenience, I'm just going ahead and creating in this particular resource group out here. And I will now go ahead and say that this is sample application insights in 000 US is 2. Change the location to East US 2 out here. And I will say that the resource model is classic to begin with. I'll say classic application insights out here. I'll say tags, review, and create. So I just gave the name. I just went ahead and said what kind of a model that I need. I said it's a classic model that I need. And I'm just creating the application insights right now. This is the first side of it. And creation of the application insights and keeping the application insights ready is the role of a DevOps engineer. So what you can do is you can also use an ARM template or a Terraform and say application insights out here. So application insights, and if you say ARM template out here, then this will work. So in your Azure Resource Manager template, you can simply go ahead and see the JSON file. You can also use the application insights template out here. You can simply go ahead, take all these things and say, okay, fine, this is the application insights. I want to deploy this out. And you can go ahead and deploy your entire insights component. So it's saying Microsoft Insights / component. You can go ahead and give your application insights. Let's say you can deploy the application insights out here. Again, there are a couple of things like it's telling what kind of an application, or it's saying what is the name, what is the target array, and all that stuff. I'll say, okay, fine, great. Okay, the source of the application is okay, not a problem. Just you do not need the request source. So I have all these things. You can just go ahead, take this template and deploy this out. But for me, I just went and created this out manually. So let's go into the resource. Again, even in this particular template, you can just go ahead, say export template out here. This is going to also tell you how the, let's say, template really looks like. So this is going to give you the entire ARM template definition. I'm good with that. So just come back and let's see. So I have the application insights created, and in order to connect to this application insights, you need something called as an instrumentation key. We call it as an I key or an instrumentation key out here, which is just like, let's say, a non-sensitive information that is used to go ahead and for an application to connect to your application insights. This key is required, and also I, as a DevOps engineer, created the application insights and this is ready, but it's not usable. Meaning, if I go to things like application map, or if I go to things like, so now you say it's telling no data available. If you go to things like live metrics, here it tells you, okay, fine, there is no live metrics and all that stuff. Not available. Your app is offline or using an older, let's say, SDK out here. Then transaction search. You have a couple of things. You have a couple of features out here. Let's understand that. But as of now, you have just created the application insights infrastructure. This is just the infrastructure. I still have to configure something called as a telemetry injection. Telemetry is another word for logs. I have to configure something called as telemetry injection, meaning application insights is a two-way bridge. One, as a DevOps engineer, you created. Two, as a developer of this code, I will have to make sure my code reports all the logs to the application insights, and this is called telemetry injection. So what I'll do is, let's go to our code. Let's go into our code out here. This is the code that we've been using, just SQL app. I'll just download this out, and in here, once it's downloaded, let me extract the code and let me open this in a Visual Studio at my end. So I'll just go ahead, extract this, and once extracted, I'll go into the folder and I'll now start working as a developer. So infrastructure has been created from a DevOps engineer's end. Next, you need to configure the telemetry injection, and this needs to be done by a development team. Let's see how they do it. So I'll go inside the application. I'll open up the SLN file of this particular application out here. And once I open this out, let's see what I get here. So it's going to give me the entire application out here. And once I have the entire application, I will start working. So I have the entire application right now ready with me. And as a developer right now, once I'm done developing everything, once I'm, let's say, done developing everything, testing everything, I'll say, okay, fine. Let me go ahead, do a right click here and go to add and say add application insights telemetry.